go to the book of Ephesians, chapter 4. In verse 28 we read, "He who steals must steal no longer, but rather he must labor, performing with his own hands what is good, so that he will have something to share with one who has need." This little verse encapsulates the idea that there has to be a monumental change in the life of the one who has been converted to Jesus Christ. And if his life had been such that he was a parasite in the community, a parasite who was stealing and living off other people's hard-earned money or goods, he must change that. That can no longer continue to exist in his life as a Christian. That must be changed. And he says, instead of being selfish and indulging the self with this stealing, obviously to provide for your own desires and your own needs, he says you now need to labor. Labor is, with some people, and especially with this type of person, is a word that they don't like. It means work. It means having to do something, having to get up out of the bed in the morning, having to go out, having to do that day's work in order to earn the money to keep your family. There's a lot of people who just want to live easy. They want to be able to lie on all day, do an hour or two and make big money so that they can indulge themselves and those who are their family. But he says that's not to happen. We must labour as Christians, performing with our own hands what is good, so that we will have something to share with one who has need. Notice the shift is so great now that the man is working, but he's not just working for himself and his family. He realizes now that there's more to working, and there's more to life than just self-indulgence, that there are other people that he needs to consider. And even when he's working, he realizes that he's working not only to provide for his family, but he's working so that he might be able to help others who are in need. Now we get a picture of a man who is being transformed from a selfish individual to one who is a considerate, caring, loving, and giving individual. And that is quite a transformation for most people. The whole idea of the work ethic is very deeply entrenched in the scriptures. I know it's very deeply entrenched in our natures to get things for nothing, to do as little as we can for as much as we can. There's a lot of people with that philosophy in life. But it's no longer the Christian philosophy. You may have held that opinion at one stage in your life, but you should no longer hold that opinion as a Christian. As a Christian, you are eager to work, willing to work. I know there's the situation right now, even when you're willing and eager, that you might not be able to get a job. So I understand that, and that is a difficulty. So I'm not putting a burden on people's backs who are trying to find a job, who are eager to work and willing to work to provide for their family. I'm talking about the person who just couldn't care less. Life owes him. The government owes him. Everybody owes him. And he thinks he can take what he wants when he wants for himself. That's the individual we're talking about here. That individual needs to change their lives and change their thinking so that they can conform to what is required as a Christian. The Apostle Paul was a great example of what a Christian should be. He was a preacher, he was an apostle, as we know, and he could have very well got his support, his total support, from preaching the gospel. But there were a number of reasons why he didn't do it. at this early stage, at the early stages when he was preaching in Macedonia and Achaia. He didn't take anything from most of those churches, and there was good reason for that. But I want you to see what he was prepared to do, just to give you an insight into the man's thinking and into his willingness to get on with the job. Don't just hang around, get on with the job, he tells us. Acts chapter 20. In this chapter he calls for the Ephesian elders. And he's warning them about the dangers that will exist when he's no longer there. So, at the end of this little talk to the elders, he tells us in verse 32, "And now I commend you to God and to the word of his grace, which is able to build you up and to give you the inheritance among all those who are sanctified." Watch this. "I have coveted no one's silver or gold or clothes." I have coveted no one's silver, gold, or clothes. I don't look at other people and see what they have and want what they have. I don't look at other people, how they dress, and want to dress or want to be dressed better than they are. I don't want their silver. I don't want anything from them as far as he was concerned. I've coveted none of it. You yourselves know that these hands ministered to my own needs and to the men who were with me. In everything I showed you that by working hard in this manner, you must help the weak and remember the words of the Lord Jesus, that he himself said, "It is more blessed to give than to receive." So here was his advice to the elders, and that advice no doubt was to be passed on to the Christians when they went back to the congregation, and it has also been passed on to us, and we're reading it right now and taking encouragement from it. He says his hands, he physically worked with his hands when he hadn't got enough support to support himself. Physically worked with his hands, and he says it was not only to minister to his own needs, but to the men who were with me. It's quite incredible that he was thinking about the others as well, and he was prepared to work so that the others might be fed and looked after. Again, I'd like you to think in terms of your own working life and your own salary. How often have you thought when you've got your pay packet and you put it into your pocket, how often have you thought of other people other than yourself and your family? How often have you thought of what belongs to the Lord out of this pay packet? And then what can I give to others? How can I help somebody else with the money that I receive? It's not very often we think that way. Again, we're all selfish, and especially when it comes to money, we all feel, no, this is mine, I've worked hard for this, nobody can tell me what to do with this, I'll do with it what I want, and what I want is, I want to spend it on myself, and I want to spend it on those who I love. But we need to start extending our thinking, stretching our minds, opening our hearts in terms of what we receive, so that we might be able to help others as well. That was the thinking of the Apostle Paul, and he based it on the foundation that it is more blessed to give. And this is what the Lord had said, it was more blessed to give than to receive. It is much easier to give than to receive as well. Now when you have to receive, you should be gracious enough of heart to be able to do it without being resentful. But when you have to give, you should also be gracious enough to give without being resentful, that you're having to give something that belongs to you, which you wanted for yourself, and you begrudgingly hand it over to somebody else, and then put them under a terrible compliment because you've helped them, or you've tried to share what you've received. That's not the attitude that we should have. It just isn't the attitude that we should have. We should be just delighted. What we have received belonged to the Lord in the first place. We're only getting what the Lord is giving us. We should be prepared to give it all back to the Lord, like the widow who gave up her little mite, so that she showed the Lord, I trust you, it was from you, I never had anything in the first place, you gave it all to me, I'm giving it all back to you, so that you might know now that I trust you to that extent. It's a wonderful thing, absolutely wonderful. But these principles were to be set down as standards by which the Christians would live. Let's now go to 1 Thessalonians chapter 2. And verse 9. He says to the Thessalonians, for you recall, brethren, our labour and hardship, how working night and day so as not to be a burden to any of you, we proclaim to you the gospel of God. Isn't that wonderful? Now, I think what he would be doing in Thessalonica was exactly what he was doing in Acts chapter 18. Let's go to Acts chapter 18. When he was in Corinth. It says, after these things, he left Athens and went to Corinth. And he found a Jew named Aquila, a native of Pontus, having recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla, because Claudius had commanded all the Jews to leave Rome. He came to them, and because he was of the same trade, he stayed with them, and they were working, for by trade they were tent makers. And he was reasoning in the synagogue every Sabbath and trying to persuade Jews and Greeks and so forth. So what we have now here is an indication of what he did when he was in Corinth, when he was in Thessalonica and wasn't receiving enough support. He worked with his own hands. He was a tent maker by trade. That was his day job, so to speak, a tent maker. I'm sure that was a hard job. They had to do the stitching by hand. They didn't have these sewing machines that we have. They had to do it by hand. That material that the tents were made out of was harsh, coarse material, and it would have been a very difficult job to be doing, and it would have required a lot of energy and effort put into it. But he was ready to do that in order to earn the money. At the same time, he never neglected the preaching of the gospel as well. So we can see here was a man who was truly dedicated to the cause of Christ, whether he was working with the tents or whether he was preaching the gospel. It was his life to serve the Lord and to serve others as well. But he wanted the Thessalonians to remember the hardship and the labour and the working night and day so as not to be a burden to you. And the reason he emphasises that with the Thessalonians is they seem to have had a problem there. And the problem was that there was a lot of lazy people around in Thessalonica. They didn't want to work. Even after they became Christians, they just didn't want to work. So he insists in more than one place in the two books of Thessalonians that they would just go about. Look at chapter 4, verse 11, and make it, he says, your ambition to lead a quiet life and attend to your own business and work with your hands just as we commanded you, so that you will behave properly towards outsiders and not be in any need. Behaving properly towards outsiders was very important for us, for the Christians. It was important back then, it's important right now. If you're not paying your bills, you can get a bad reputation. If you're not paying your bills, deliberately not paying your bills, and you're a Christian, you're bringing reproach on the church and you're bringing reproach on Jesus Christ, whose name you wear. You're a Christian. We're to owe no one anything except to love one another. If we make a commitment or give our word, that must be a genuine commitment, and we must keep our word. We mustn't get into the game playing that the world gets into. I know years ago, Switzers were running a 6 months as cash thing. And this is a long time ago. You might not ever remember this. They might not remember it either. But they used to, you could get your purchase thing if it was big, and if you paid it over the 6 months, you got it for the cash price. It was a great deal. I thought it was terrific. So I would work that way. But what people would do is they'd buy something big, they'd pay it off down to the last £200 as it was at that time, and then they'd stop paying it. And then the company either would have to take them to court to reclaim the money, probably after sending letters and letters and everything, which they were spending money, or the company just left it. And I think the company decided just to leave a lot of those debts. So the people got to know about it, and they started to play that game with the company. Finally, the company just closed it all down and said, that's it, finished. It's not going to happen again. See, the bad people, the inconsiderate people, the people who are game players, they ruin it for the rest of us. All the good things, the laws that we would have or not have, for example, because we're living in a country, Irish people don't like to be bound by laws. But that just leaves a huge responsibility on us to keep the laws that are there. Now that people are just willy-nilly breaking all the laws, they have to now start making the laws, and they have to start applying the laws. And if we become like other places in the world, the police will almost outnumber us so as to make sure that we're keeping the laws. We don't want to live in a society like that, do we? Well, if we don't, then we need to take the responsibility and just make sure that we are behaving properly towards outsiders and that we're not in any need. That's our responsibility. That's what the Lord would have us to do. Let's look in 2 Thessalonians chapter 3. It opens the whole subject up for us in regard to what was happening at Thessalonica. Verse 6 now. Now we commend you, brethren, in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, that you keep away from every brother who leads an unruly life, and not according to the tradition which you received from us. For you yourselves know how you ought to follow our example, because we did not act in an undisciplined manner among you, nor did we eat anyone's bread without paying for it. But with labour and hardship, we kept working night and day so that we would not be a burden to any of you. Not because we do not have the right to this, but in order to offer ourselves as a model for you so that you would follow our example. For even when we were with you, we used to give you this order: if anyone is not willing to work, then he is not to eat either. For we hear that some among you are leading an undisciplined life, doing no work at all, but acting like busybodies. Now such persons we command and exhort in the Lord Jesus Christ to work in quiet fashion and eat their own bread. But as for you, brethren, do not grow weary of doing good, and so forth. So he says, look, I've set myself up as an example, as a model. And you must, when you're doing the right things, when you're working and paying your taxes and paying your bills and looking after your family and trying to help those who might be in need, you are an example. You are an example. Don't ever forget that. You're standing for a mode of life which God approves. And you become an example to other people, even though all the rest of the country, if you were the only one, and all the rest of the country were living crooked lives and doing wrong things, you will stand as a beacon of light in this country and for our people, and show by your behaviour what is right and what God expects. Don't let all the rest of them influence you and drag you down and change your behaviour in that regard. It is not good. You know what is right, you do what is right, and you will become a model and an example for all of those around you. All the rest of the stuff is unruly behavior. You know, he talks about eating your own bread and not being a burden to anyone. That's a good lesson for younger people. It's a good lesson for younger people. Younger people just think, well, Mommy and Daddy will supply it. Well, of course they'll supply it. But that should not be taken for granted. Especially when you're earning for yourself. If you're earning for yourself and you're not giving up anything in the home, and yet every time you come into the house, you're opening the fridge door and you're taking out food and you're buttering yourself bread and you're asking when is the next meal, and you then you're taking somebody else's food and you're behaving in such a manner, and it happens all the time. It happens all the time. But you're contributing nothing to the home, nothing. You are not living in a scriptural way. You are going contrary to God's will. You are eating other men's bread, and it is not yours. You have not contributed to it. You have not helped out in the home, and you are robbing your parents is what you're doing. You're living in an unruly way. You have no care at all whether they can afford it, how much I'm eating. You have no care as to whether other people are going hungry or not. As long as you feed your face and you're happy with your full belly, you couldn't care less about anything. Well, you need to change it. You need to change it. Because God says that that's unruly and it's unchristian behavior. And you need, if you are earning, you need to contribute to the home. You're being supplied your food, your electricity, your heating, your bath water, your drinking water. Everything is supplied for you. Somebody is vacuuming the place for you to keep it clean so it's nice for you. Somebody is breaking their back to cook the meals for you. And you think you have the right just to walk in and play big shot. And it should all be ready for you when you want it. It's not right. In 1 Timothy 5 and verse 8. Listen to this. This is the principle which you start with early and continue throughout your whole life. But if anyone does not provide for his own, and especially for those of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. Some of the translation says worse than an infidel. We have to provide for our own. That's our responsibility. And the men must take this very seriously. That's our responsibility, our primary responsibility. We must take that very seriously indeed. And you know, if you're not prepared to hand up to your parents when you're a young person what is due them out of your wages, your wife is going to have awful trouble later on. Because you won't want to give her what she needs in order to look after the household. Your children might even be going hungry because you feel that you've learned that I keep my wages, I spend it the way I like, and it's all mine. And you're wrong. It's not all yours. There's no free passage in this life. God doesn't expect parents to support indolent young people who care less about anybody, not even the family. Because they know that this is going to be a progressive thing, it'll go all through all their lives, and that will be a major problem for them and for their families when they get married. So we need to provide for our own, and that's what God expects. That's what He expects. The example is there from the Apostle Paul, the teaching is there from the Holy Spirit, and we are coming to terms with it, and hopefully that we will lead a life that is consistent with all of that. But this generosity of giving from what you're earning, and understanding the blessing of giving, and understanding that, that we need to help each other is very important. And the early church understood this very, very, very well. Let's go back to Acts chapter 2 now. First of all, in verse 42 of Acts chapter 2, after these 3,000 souls had been baptized, and they were added together with the apostles and composed the first Church of Christ in the world, and that was at Jerusalem. And it says, and they, these new converts, these early Christians, were continually devoting themselves to the apostles' teaching. They saw that as their standard by which they must live, and to fellowship. And this word fellowship is used, at least the Greek word fellowship that's used here is used in 2 Corinthians 9:13 and in other places, and it means contribution as well as fellowship. The contribution is the embodiment of that fellowship that they shared with one another, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. Now, I mentioned the contribution here because I think within saying the apostles' teaching, the breaking of bread, prayer, and fellowship, it just fits in so well. These were acts of worship which they were engaged in from the very early stages. But in terms of this fellowship, he expands on that now in verse 44. And all those who had believed were together and had all things in common. And they began selling their property and possessions and were sharing them with all as anyone might have need. Notice that now. Here was this transformation that had taken place. Out of selfishness into unselfishness. Out of hoarding for oneself into being willing to give everything that they possessed and share it with others. We have a little bit of help on this. If we go to Acts chapter 4, I believe it is. Yeah, verse 32. And the congregation of those who believed were of one heart and soul, and not one of them claimed that anything belonging to him was his own, but all things were common property to them. And with great power the apostles were giving testimony to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus, and abundant grace was upon them all. For there was not a needy person among them, for all who were owners of land or houses would sell them and bring the proceeds of the sales, and lay them at the apostles' feet, and they would be distributed to each as any had need. There was an emergency situation in Jerusalem when the church was established. No doubt because many of those who had come from distant places had overstayed their pilgrimage to Jerusalem. They came there for Pentecost and they were converted, so no doubt they stayed on much longer than they intended to, or maybe even had provisions to. So there was a great need then among the early Christians, and seeing the great need, those who had anything, like extra things like pieces of land and so forth, began to sell them and lay it at the apostles' feet, and this was distributed to everyone then that might have need. It shows, though, the caring and the sharing that went on in the early church. It shows how they were having fellowship with one another, genuine, heartfelt, self-sacrificing fellowship with each other, seeing to each other's needs. Not just, I think we could all just hand out a few euro from your pocket and say, well, there you go, I hope that helps you now, and feel nothing for the other individual. We could all do that. And there's a lot of heartless giving in the world. So, but when we give, it needs to be out of a heart of compassion and mercy and genuine interest in the well-being of other people. The whole Western thing of individualism and narcissism has had a terrible effect on all of us. Now, in one way it was good. There was terrible oppression years ago. I know in Ireland, I can't speak of anywhere else, but everybody knew everybody else's business. Everybody was into trying to run everybody else's life. Everybody was had a comment and had a and there were people who were maybe a little more well off than others, and they had a lot of clout because they had some more money and position and so forth. And they would oppress the other people that they felt didn't have that much money and look down on them. And there was all of this little setup which was nasty and wicked and horrible. I hated it. I wanted to get out of this place because of it. And thank God that was broken. But now we're in the opposite extreme. Nobody knows the next door neighbour. Nobody cares. Nobody wants to help. Everybody's into themselves. Total obsession with self. And with what self wants and self likes and self needs, total obsession. We need to break that, brethren. As Christians, it's not right. We have to stop being obsessed with ourselves. We're of so little importance in the scheme of things. We need to realize that our survival is our togetherness, our working for each other, our caring for each other. Should not even heaven works on the principle every man for himself. Heaven works on the principle that love your neighbour as yourself. And that self-love is a self-sacrificing love which we must be able to give to the neighbour. Now when it came to organising worldwide this help and this contribution, we have to go to 1 Corinthians chapter 16. It says, "Now concerning the collection for the saints, as I directed the churches of Galatia, so do you also." What did he direct the churches of Galatia? What was he telling now the churches of Macedonia and Achaia? He was telling them that on the first day of every week, each one of you is to put aside and save as he may prosper, so that no collections be made when I come, he says. So now he identifies a day on which the collection was to be made. The day was the first day of the week. And you'd have to ask yourself, why the first day of the week? Well, we know from Acts chapter 20 and verse 7 that the disciples gathered together to break bread on the first day of the week, to remember the death, burial and resurrection of our Lord Jesus Christ on the first day of the week. So they came together to break bread as a church. 1 Corinthians chapter 11, just a few pages back here. Now there was a problem with this Lord's Supper in Corinth. So he says in verse 17, "In giving this instruction I do not praise you, because you come together not for the better, but for the worst." But notice there was a coming together according to this verse. "For in the first place, when you come together as a church, I hear that divisions exist among you, and in part I believe it. For there must also be factions among you, so that those who are approved may become evident among you. Therefore, when you meet together," now notice we're back to that same statement in verse 17, come together, we're meeting together, but we're meeting together as a church. And we know from Acts chapter 20 and verse 7, this was on the first day of the week. We would meet together to break bread or to eat the Lord's Supper. And then he tells them what they were doing wrong, and he instructs them then as to how to partake of the Lord's Supper right. But the contribution was to be made every first day of the week. And that feeds into that Acts 20 verse 7 as well. They didn't just meet one first day of the week. They met every first day of the week to break bread. They met together as a church to worship God. And when they came together as a church, part of the worship of God was to give to the collection that would be made on the first day of the week, according to 1 Corinthians chapter 16, verses 1 and 2. So here we have it. On the first day of every week, each one of you is to put aside and save. Each one of you. That means it's individual. That means everybody is responsible who is a Christian to put aside something to give to the Lord. You have to put it aside. You have to determine what you're going to give. It's as you have purposed in your heart that you will give. It can't be enforced on you. There's a lot of churches who want to enforce a tithe, for example. Now we know from Malachi 3 and verse 8 that there was tithing in the Old Testament. You'd say, what was a tithe? A tithe was to give a tenth of everything. In the Old Testament anyway. When they brought in their crops, a tenth of that crop went to the Lord. And the tenth that went to the Lord was the best of the crop. If it was, say, fruits that they brought in, a tenth of all the fruit that they brought in was to go to the Lord, but it was to be the best of the fruit. If it was sheep, they would put them through, those jams, one at a time, count up to 10, mark the 10th one, and then move it on and mark the 10th one till they got the whole flock of sheep through, and everyone who had the mark on it was dedicated to God. That's the way it worked back then. Now, he could easily have said here that each one of you is to put aside a tenth, or each one of you is to tithe what you have earned. And there would have been no question as to how much then we should give, what proportion of what we've earned we should give. No problem at all. But this way, he's put the burden on your shoulders to make the decision. Because he wants you to be mature enough to make a decision. He wants to see what's in your heart in regard to money and where your trust is. Is it in the Lord? Is it in the money? Do you still have this carping greed in your heart to where you want to hold on to everything you've earned? Or have you got the generous spirit that is willing not only to give to God, but to give to others as well, to help wherever you can, knowing that it's more blessed to give than to receive? So it's up to you. But it is as you have prospered. I know of a situation, we were talking about this in the study, a situation where somebody in the church hadn't got the money, but they kept putting in the check because they didn't want to be seen not to have the money, and they didn't want to be seen not to be putting into the contribution. Now, that's all wrong. If you haven't prospered, you're not obligated. And the Lord knows what you've prospered or not prospered. And He knows you're not obligated. To be doing it as a show for the brethren is just the wrong attitude altogether. It's not right. This is between you and God, not between you and the brethren. It's not a show-off thing or a big macho statement here. I am putting in so much money and I hope everybody else can match that and how great I am. You're not going blowing a trumpet before yourself telling everybody how much you put in the collection. It's not the right attitude at all. But definitely it is according to your ability. 2 Corinthians chapter 8. It says in verse 12, "For if the readiness is present, it is acceptable according to what a person has, not according to what he does not have." This is verse 12 now, 2 Corinthians chapter 8. Verse 13, "For this is not for the ease of others and for your affliction, but by way of equality. At this present time, your abundance being a supply for their need, so that their abundance also may become a supply for your need, that there may be equality. As it is written, he who gathered much did not have too much, and he who gathered little had no lack." Now, this is a reference back to the collection of the manna that fell from heaven, which every man was to go out in the morning and collect an omer for each person in the house. And that was to be boiled and cooked and so forth. That was the bread God would give them from heaven. But if you had 10 members in your household, you had to collect 10 omers. If you had 3 people in your household, you could only collect 3 omers. If you had 2 people in that house, it was 2 omers. So that when the collection was made, some people might have got more than others, but everybody only got enough to feed their own family. And that was the point here, that we give according to our ability. And it will be different for everybody, but it would be the same in the sense that I am giving according to my ability. And it's not that you're to be crucified and everybody else is to be at their ease with all of this. It is so that we might have sufficient to share with everybody who has need, and create a situation where everybody can provide for their own family, and they can do that with ease. Okay, so it was on the first day of the week. It was as we prosper, and we were to put that aside and save. Now there are some commentators think putting this aside and save is to put it aside at home, from which the funds then are to be distributed. I just can't see that, because it contradicts the idea that says here, so that no collections be made when I come. If you're putting aside and saving at home, when the Apostle Paul, say you were back there in Corinth, when the Apostle Paul came, how was he going to get that money? Well, the collection would have to be made then. The very thing he says he didn't want to happen would have to happen. So it's obvious when they put aside to say and save, they put it in the collection, and they saved it in the collection so that there would be no collections would have to be made when the Apostle Paul came to collect that money and to bring it down to Jerusalem and the needy saints. All right. This collection is for certain purposes. It's for the work of the church. It's really what it's for. And the work of the church can be broken down to 3 things. Evangelism, the preaching of the gospel. We know from 1 Corinthians chapter 9 that the Lord had ordained that those who proclaim the gospel should get their living from the gospel. Chapter 9, verse 14. The Apostle Paul in 2 Corinthians chapter 11 had to tell the Corinthians, I robbed other churches, taking wages of them to preach the gospel to you. So evangelism, part of our giving on the first day of the week, is to support the evangelism or the preaching of the gospel. The second work is Maria's word, edification. In 1 Corinthians chapter 14 and verse 26. They talked about the times when they would get together to worship. This was the time when they had miraculous gifts. And he says, what is the outcome then, brethren? When you assemble, each one has a psalm, has a teaching, has a revelation, has a tongue, has an interpretation. Let all things be done for edification, he says. That word edification just means the building up of one another. Everything that we do in the church is to be building each other up. The teaching of the classes is to build each other up. The worship together is not only to praise God and to honour God, but it's to encourage and build up one another. It's to help each other. All of the work that is necessary to that building up, the classes, the worship, the necessity for a building, for blackboard, for chalk, all of those things are justified under that heading of edification. We know from Ephesians chapter 1 that we're all members of the same body, and each working part is to contribute to the building up of that body. Each person is responsible. Now, I could get off on this, I haven't got even the time to do it, but I just will mention that we must realise it's not the preacher's job to get to everybody and to help everybody, because it's simply impossible. You do what you can. It's everybody's job to mix, to show an interest in each other, to talk about spiritual things to each other, to encourage each other, even to correct each other if that's what's necessary to the salvation of the soul. Everybody is responsible for doing that. It's not just one person. Everybody's responsible for doing that. Now, I don't want you to take it on board that you now must become the executioner for the whole congregation, and when you see somebody's head needs to be chopped off, you'll chop it off quite well for it, and I'll be doing the preacher a big favour. You don't need to do me that sort of favour. I don't need that sort of favour. I've got to try and stitch the head back on again and make sure that everything is okay, and that the person that has had their head chopped off will not feel too bad towards the person who has chopped it off, and the person who's chopped it off needs to learn that that's not what you do in the church. That's not what you do in the church. So, I mean, encourage. I mean, build up. And that's what edification is all about. And the last work that we have identified in the scriptures is benevolence. And that's what's covered for 1 Corinthians chapter 16, 2 Corinthians chapter 8, 2 Corinthians chapter 9, Romans chapter 15, beginning with about verse 25 to 33. All of those passages of scriptures deals with benevolence. Now, as far as I can see from the scriptures, those are the areas. There is no other area. And so far as the contribution is concerned, it is facilitated through personal enterprise, not a business enterprise. The church would have no right to get into business in order to supply the needs of the church or the saints. They have no right. The only right that it's given is through that personal enterprise, what the members earn and what they are prepared to give out of their earnings. But the whole attitude of loving God and loving your fellow man is shown by your willingness to give to God and to give to your fellow man. The proof of the love is in the giving and your willingness to give. Let's understand that, and let's try and develop hearts that have comprehended that through compassion, mercy, kindness, and so forth, and interest in other people. And I think we will be the better off then as a congregation of people, as Christians who are following the Lord, if we do that. I'll leave it with you for today. Thank you.